Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a la Casa de América, en esta ocasión a la charla coloquio Developing Global Intercultural Dialogue. Contamos esta tarde, en primer lugar, con la embajadora de Misión Especial para la Alianza de Civilizaciones del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores y de Cooperación, la excelentísima señora Belén Alfaro, con el vicerrector de Relaciones Institucionales y Relaciones Internacionales de la Universidad Complutense de Madrid, don Andrés Arias, y con el director del Máster en Gestión del Patrocinio Cultural de la Universidad Complutense de Madrid, don José María Parreño. Asimismo, como principales intervinientes, además de la embajadora, con Tendayi Bloom, Research Fellow, y con Valeria Bello, también Research Fellow, ambas de la United Nations University. Para la Casa de América es un auténtico honor y placer acoger esta tarde esta charla coloquio. Quiero agradecer especialmente a la Universidad Complutense de Madrid el que se haya puesto en contacto con nosotros para acoger esta exposición, y sin más preámbulos yo le voy a dar la palabra a don Andrés Arias para que dirija este acto. Muchísimas gracias por su asistencia aquí esta tarde, muchísimas gracias a los ponentes y adelante.
Bueno, me toca a mí la cuestión protocolaria, excelentísima señora embajadora, señor director del máster, queridas amigas, queridos amigos, queridas Research Fellows de la United Nations University. Es para nosotros un gran orgullo y agradecemos a Casa América que nos haya acogido aquí para esta conferencia, charla, debate, coloquio, pues estar presentes hoy aquí, además acompañando a colegas de un máster yo creo que muy importante para la Complutense, un máster en gestión del patrimonio cultural. Y el otro día aprendí muchas cosas cuando hablaba con las colegas que colaboran con el máster, que el patrimonio cultural, yo ya lo intuía, ¿no? Pero me vino muy bien que me lo reforzaran, saber que el patrimonio cultural es más que las piedras de las catedrales, los cuadros en los museos, ¿no? Sino que también tiene que ver con la vida, con el modo en el que hacemos la vida en las ciudades, lo que les ofrecemos al forastero de nuestras costumbres, de nuestras formas de vivir, ¿no? Yo no me voy a enrollar, simplemente agradecer y animarles a todos. Tengo una labor promocional que hacer siempre que voy a este tipo de actos, que se acerquen a la Complutense. En ocasiones salimos en los medios por lo más negativo, pero yo creo que por lo que nos interesa y por lo que debemos y queremos salir es por este tipo de eventos, ¿no? Por lo académico, por lo cultural, que es en definitiva a lo que nos dedicamos. Le voy a dar primero la palabra a José María Parreño, al director del máster, pues para que les dirija pues a ustedes pues unas primeras ideas antes de darle después la palabra a la excelentísima señora embajadora. José María, cuando quieras.
Bueno, gracias, vicerrector, gracias a la Casa de América por su hospitalidad, a la señora embajadora y a las conferenciantes. La verdad es que nunca pensamos desde el máster de gestión de patrimonio que pudiéramos tener una clausura de curso tan importante, con una mesa llena de personalidades y que uniera esta conservación y gestión del patrimonio con una dimensión más ligada pues, a las relaciones internacionales y a esta alianza de civilizaciones, que es una manera de hablar de entendimiento entre pueblos. Yo, en fin, voy a ser muy breve, cosa que agradecerá el público, y solamente señalar que en este máster de patrimonio estamos tratando de enseñar para conservar, de enseñar para gestionar y de enseñar para vivir mejor. Ahora mismo el patrimonio es un recurso importantísimo, no solamente desde el punto de vista económico, sino también como una manera de reconocer la propia identidad, la historia, y eso es la manera también de saber entender mejor el futuro. Los alumnos de este máster, a los que he tratado como profesor, me parecen personas realmente comprometidas con sus intereses, motivadas, brillantes, y de que estoy seguro que vamos a poder conocer en el futuro haciendo una labor importante para sus respectivos países y también para este. No tengo que decir mucho más, volver a agradecer la presencia de todos ustedes y de los intervinientes en la mesa y ceder la palabra a la señora embajadora.
Muchas gracias. Vicerrector de Relaciones Institucionales e Internacionales, don Andrés Arias, director del Máster en Gestión de Patrimonio Cultural, don José María Parreño, director de Programas de Casa de América, don Rodrigo Campos, investigadoras de la Universidad de Naciones Unidas, señora Blum y señora Bello, señoras y señores. Bueno, en primer lugar, me gustaría agradecer a la Universidad Complutense, a su vicerrectorado y al Máster sobre Gestión del Patrimonio Cultural por haberme invitado a participar en esta sesión, así como a Casa de América por facilitar que yo tenga lugar, y, por supuesto, también a las investigadoras de la Universidad de Naciones Unidas en Barcelona, cuya colaboración es fundamental dentro de esta institución. Bien, vivimos en un mundo que cada vez es más intercultural, complejo, interconectado. Un mundo en el que las crisis se propagan a la velocidad de un clic y se extienden rápidamente a través de las fronteras. La globalización ha traído muchos efectos positivos, ha aumentado la interconectividad, pero al mismo tiempo ha provocado una serie de tensiones interculturales y de diferencias religiosas y culturales. Cada año más de 1.000 millones de personas cruzan fronteras internacionales y 25% de ellas son menores de 25 años. 1 de cada 3 conflictos en el mundo tiene una raíz cultural o religiosa. La percepción de las diferencias como amenazas ha provocado el surgimiento de intolerancia, discriminación y tensiones interculturales. Bien, en esta situación me voy a referir a 3 cuestiones. Primero, cuestiones que considero prioritarias. Segundo, el instrumento de la Alianza de Civilizaciones como instrumento de diplomacia preventiva y a favor del diálogo intercultural e interreligioso. Y tercero, futuras acciones que es necesario realizar de forma prioritaria. Bien, en cuanto al primer apartado, cuestiones prioritarias, aquí quisiera resaltar a su vez también 3 cuestiones. Primero, necesidad de aumentar los mecanismos de prevención a nivel internacional, regional, nacional y local. Y esto no solamente por los Estados, sino por los Estados junto con actores no estatales, sociedad civil, líderes políticos, empresariales, ONGs, líderes religiosos. O sea, una acción de todos en conjunto. Segundo, el derecho a la libertad de opinión y expresión y el derecho a la libertad de religión y creencia son 2 valores fundamentales y universales. Si bien el límite a la libertad de expresión es el odio que provoca discriminación y violencia. Esto es muy importante para tener una sociedad que esté libre de tensiones interculturales y que sea tolerante y a favor del respeto de otras culturas y religiones. Y tercera cuestión, el diálogo intercultural y la cultura son una dimensión del desarrollo. Para alcanzar los objetivos de desarrollo del milenio, se debe de acometer el reto de construir sociedades diversas que sean culturalmente inclusivas. La cultura debe estar incluida dentro de los objetivos de desarrollo post-2015. Ahora mismo Naciones Unidas está trabajando para hacer una nueva lista de objetivos a partir de 2015, que era la fecha en la que se tenían que cumplir los primeros objetivos de desarrollo del milenio. Entonces, a partir de esta fecha se está elaborando una nueva lista, hay una serie de grupos de trabajo, hay una asesora especial del Secretario General de Naciones Unidas para esto, pero creemos que la cultura debe ser también un objetivo, y que debe incluirse, y que la cultura es necesaria para el desarrollo, y la cultura también es un medio de paz, y todo ello también es necesario para el desarrollo. Segunda parte de mi charla es la Alianza de Civilizaciones como instrumento de diplomacia preventiva. La Alianza de Civilizaciones es una iniciativa de Naciones Unidas copatrocinada por España y Turquía. Fue originalmente una idea presentada por España ante la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas y que luego fue asumida por el Secretario General de Naciones Unidas, convirtiéndose en un programa de esta y con un alto representante que es nombrado por el Secretario General de Naciones Unidas. Su objetivo es contribuir a la erradicación de las tensiones interculturales que alimentan el extremismo y la radicalización. La alianza actúa en 3 niveles principales: a nivel internacional, a nivel regional y a nivel nacional. A nivel internacional tenemos el alto representante nombrado por el secretario general, que ahora mismo es el qatarí Al-Nasser, que fue presidente de la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas. Anteriormente fue el expresidente de Portugal, Sampaio. Asimismo, a nivel internacional, la alianza tiene un grupo de amigos de 140 miembros, que son 120 países y 20 organizaciones internacionales y regionales, que se reúnen a nivel ministerial y a nivel de puntos focales. Y estos pues alimentan lo que es la actuación de la alianza en los distintos niveles. Y también existen los foros como medio de actuación a nivel internacional, que son unos grandes eventos junto con sociedad civil. Ahora el próximo va a ser en Bali, en Indonesia, a finales de agosto, y con representantes de gobiernos, ONG, sociedad civil, fundaciones, mundo académico, porque el diálogo intercultural es una cuestión de todos. Y por último, a nivel internacional, destacar la acción que se realiza a través de programas y proyectos en 4 áreas prioritarias de acción, que son educación, juventud, migración y medios de comunicación. La Alianza de Civilizaciones es una iniciativa orientada a la acción y para ello realiza una serie de proyectos en estas áreas. Por ejemplo, hay programas de becas para estudiantes, se realizan intercambios de estudiantes de zona, por ejemplo, pues de zona musulmana que vienen a países europeos y a Estados Unidos para conocer sus instituciones. Al contrario, estudiantes de países europeos y Estados Unidos pues van a países islámicos para conocer las instituciones y la cultura de esos países. Hay un fondo de solidaridad juvenil que se financian proyectos interculturales que sean presentados por jóvenes. Realiza escuelas de verano multiculturales con estudios sobre distintas culturas y religiones, interculturalidad, convivencia, coexistencia de todos juntos. Se organiza un festival de vídeo Plural Plus, que es a favor de la interculturalidad en la emigración. Jóvenes de distintos orígenes de un mismo país realizan vídeos a favor de la integración, de la migración, que reciben luego un premio. Hay programas de formación de periodistas en el norte de África, ¿no? Por ejemplo, hemos financiado programas en Egipto y en Marruecos, programas también de formación a periodistas, por ejemplo, en Pakistán se han realizado distintos programas. Hay un mecanismo de respuesta rápida en los medios de comunicación con un buscador global de expertos para que, por ejemplo, si en un momento hay algún evento o un acto terrorista o un acto que puede incitar pues, a la radicalización, para que los periodistas que informan sobre ello tengan acceso a expertos que puedan citar en sus artículos, que den unas visiones favorables a la tolerancia y que no supongan una mayor incitación a la violencia y al extremismo. Bien, luego en el ámbito regional, hemos visto este es el ámbito internacional, en el ámbito regional la Alianza de Civilizaciones opera a través de estrategias regionales. Actualmente existen 3, la primera fue para el sudeste de Europa, otra para el Mediterráneo, la última para Latinoamérica, y ya se han elaborado 2 planes de acción para la estrategia regional para el sudeste de Europa y la del Mediterráneo, con distintos programas y proyectos en estas zonas específicos dentro de estas áreas. Asimismo, se han celebrado consultas regionales para la zona de Asia-Pacífico, y también unas consultas regionales están negociando el establecimiento de una estrategia regional para la zona del Danubio, Cáucaso y Asia Central, una estrategia que cubra toda esta zona. Y finalmente está el plano nacional. La Alianza de Civilizaciones fomenta que los países elaboren planes nacionales para el diálogo intercultural. Esto es también muy importante. España ya ha hecho 2 planes nacionales y hay 26 países de la Alianza que cuentan con sus planes nacionales, y se trata de incentivar proyectos y medidas en los distintos departamentos ministeriales, porque la interculturalidad cubre muchos departamentos, porque es educación, pero también es justicia, es interior, asuntos exteriores, cuestiones de minorías, asuntos religiosos, cubre muchos departamentos ministeriales. Entonces, en estos planes nacionales se establecen proyectos y programas a favor de la interculturalidad, respeto de otras culturas dentro de los distintos departamentos ministeriales. España, por ejemplo, así más centrado en el tema de gestión quizá que tenga más que ver con el tema del patrimonio nacional, está el programa de Museos Sin Fronteras, una herramienta online para conocer museos y obras artísticas de otros países, ¿no? Fomento de la multiculturalidad. Está, por ejemplo, el Centro de Recursos para la Atención a la Diversidad Cultural en Educación, CREADE, del Ministerio de Educación. En fin, bueno, hay en todos los ministerios, ¿no? Por ejemplo, hay Observatorio de Racismo y la Xenofobia, hay otro observatorio del pluralismo religioso para la gestión municipal, ayudar a los municipios la gestión del pluralismo religioso, que también es pues conocimiento de otras culturas, ¿no? Y además precisamente es en el ámbito local pues donde pueden surgir problemas, ¿no? Cuestiones a lo mejor pues de cementerios, centros religiosos, o la cuestión pues de las comidas, ¿no? Los mataderos, ¿no? Todo esto a lo mejor el conflicto intercultural pues puede tener lugar pues por cuestiones interreligiosas a nivel local, y para ello el Observatorio del Pluralismo Religioso es una herramienta del Ministerio de Justicia a través de una fundación que es online, donde los distintos municipios pues pueden ahí tener toda la información de las distintas culturas y religiones, cuáles son sus prácticas, características, quiénes les representan, qué centros hay en su municipio, que a lo mejor no los conocen. Por otra parte, también una medida innovadora, nueva de España, es la de, ahora mismo está en reforma el Código Penal, se está introduciendo la tipificación de los delitos de incitación directa o indirecta al odio, la violencia por razones de etnia, religión, origen nacional o antisemitismo. Es una medida muy importante para evitar pues medidas de no respeto del otro, no respeto de otras culturas, de xenofobia, que lleven a la violencia, que inciten al odio y a la violencia. Y luego también otra medida importante que se acaba de aprobar, que está también en trámite legislativo, es la de la concesión de la nacionalidad española a los descendientes de judíos sefardíes que dejaron España en el siglo XV. Bien, esto es un ejemplo, ¿no? Que decir, hay muchas medidas, ¿no? En los distintos ministerios, pero bueno, un ejemplo de distintas medidas a nivel nacional. Bien, y dentro de la Alianza de Civilizaciones, como instrumento preventivo de diplomacia preventiva, además de esta actuación a nivel internacional, regional y nacional, lo que me gustaría destacar es que no se trata solo de una actuación entre gobiernos y organizaciones internacionales, que son también intergubernamentales, no, sino que se trata de una actuación también con sociedad civil. Todos los proyectos y programas de la Alianza, las reuniones, los foros, son con sociedad civil. se considera que es fundamental, sociedad civil, que es pues cualquier sociedad, ¿no? Cualquier representante de la sociedad, ONGs, también mundo académico, por supuesto, fundaciones, líderes religiosos, también mundo empresarial, porque también está la cuestión de la interculturalidad dentro del mundo empresarial, dentro de la innovación empresarial. La Alianza tiene un programa en esto, que es un premio a la innovación intercultural dentro del mundo de la empresa, para favorecer un mayor entendimiento también en ese ámbito. O sea que la actuación de la Alianza se arraiga, ¿no? Esto es muy importante también, mediante acciones con sociedad civil, no es una actuación exclusivamente intergubernamental. Y dentro de estas actuaciones a nivel de sociedad civil me gustaría resaltar que es necesario reforzar el papel de las mujeres en la gestión de conflictos, en la reconciliación, en la paz y en el desarrollo sostenible. La mujer tiene un importante papel que jugar a favor del respeto intercultural y de la resolución de conflictos, y en este ámbito también es muy importante la promoción de la igualdad de derechos en educación, ¿no? Que esto no en todos los países, no en todos los ámbitos, ¿no? Hay una igualdad de derechos, pero para un mayor respeto intercultural y mayor promoción de la interculturalidad es fundamental una igualdad de derechos también de las mujeres en materia de educación. Tenemos el caso de la niña pakistaní Malala, que fue apoyada por el gobierno de Pakistán, pero bueno, ahí había una incomprensión por parte de algunos sectores de extremismo religioso, ¿no? Que no fue en absoluto apoyado por el gobierno, y que es fundamental, ¿no? En ese sentido, la promoción de igualdad de derechos a la educación. Y finalmente, mi tercer ámbito que me gustaría tratar aquí es el de acciones futuras, prioridades futuras, que es esencial en la actuación de cara al futuro. Entonces, vamos a ver, yo ahí diría, primero, más diálogo intercultural y más diálogo interreligioso. Esto es fundamental. Las causas de los conflictos no son sociales, las causas de los conflictos no son culturales ni religiosas. Las causas en realidad son sociales o políticas. La cultura y la religión, al contrario, pueden contribuir a la solución de los conflictos, y ahí los líderes religiosos también tienen un importante papel que jugar para la prevención, mediación y resolución de conflictos. El Consejo de Seguridad ha tratado estos temas y, por ejemplo, también en reuniones con organizaciones regionales que se celebran de forma regular por el Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas, como por ejemplo con la organización de la Conferencia Islámica, se ha resaltado la importancia del diálogo intercultural para una cultura de paz y la importancia de tener en cuenta los aspectos interculturales en la mediación en los conflictos y para su resolución, y también en la consolidación de la paz, porque los aspectos interculturales y muchas veces también unidos a aspectos interreligiosos, porque en muchos sitios pues la religión está unida a la cultura o la cultura a la religión, ¿no? Pero está al unísono. Entonces, en muchos sitios pues esto es fundamental para fomentar la reconciliación nacional después de un conflicto y para que haya una consolidación de la paz, ¿no? Ha habido muchos ejemplos de diálogo, por ejemplo, interreligioso a favor de la paz en los Balcanes, en Mozambique, en Burundi, ahora mismo en la República Centroafricana se ha constituido una plataforma de líderes religiosos en contra del conflicto y la utilización de la religión como medio para el conflicto y en contra de ello, ¿no? También ha habido, por ejemplo, ahora los intentos, ¿no? en Oriente Medio a favor de la paz por parte de líderes religiosos, ¿no? En una reunión que hubo en el Vaticano hace poco, y en otras áreas, también en Filipinas, se ha fomentado el diálogo intercultural e interreligioso, ¿no? Entre distintas culturas a favor de la paz. Entonces, estos son la alianza de civilizaciones y como tal todo lo que sea diálogo intercultural e interreligioso es una pieza clave de diplomacia preventiva y para la resolución y consolidación de la paz. Y segundo aspecto de actividades futuras serían ya en sectores clave. De aquí al futuro hay 3 sectores que son clave en los que tenemos que actuar todos, gobiernos, mundo académico, sociedad civil, y estos son educación, ciberespacio y medios de comunicación. Entonces, en educación, más educación intercultural, más educación formal e informal en valores interculturales, más educación en los valores, educación que tenga el respeto del otro, que también, como es el tema del máster, ¿no?, que también incluya, por supuesto, que la cultura, las manifestaciones artísticas, arquitectónicas, todas ellas son símbolos importantes de cada cultura, más educación sobre símbolos artísticos y de patrimonio cultural, ¿no?, que también, por ejemplo, son centros religiosos, pero no solamente, ¿no?, cualquier símbolo de patrimonio cultural, pues de otros países, otras culturas, una mayor educación en ello pues ayuda también a un mayor respeto y a una mayor interculturalidad. Segundo tema, el ciberespacio. El ciberespacio es el reto del futuro. Internet, medios de comunicación social, mensajes de texto. Necesitamos programas interculturales que sean interactivos. Vivimos en una sociedad de redes. La juventud pasa 1/3 de su tiempo delante de un ordenador. Los amigos de Facebook pueden tener más influencia sobre ellos que sus padres. O sea, la educación intercultural y sobre patrimonio cultural, pues debe de utilizar los mismos medios, que son los que hoy mismo están invadiendo el futuro y los que muchas veces pues son los que se utilizan a la velocidad de un clic, pues se utilizan al revés, pues para fomentar radicalización, extremismo, posiciones contrarias a otras culturas, a otros patrimonios culturales. Y tercer aspecto fundamental de nuestra acción para el futuro, los medios de comunicación. Es urgente contraatacar los mensajes negativos que puedan aparecer en medios, contra otras culturas y patrimonios culturales. Es fundamental una utilización responsable de los medios. A este respecto, quiero sacar las conclusiones de una reunión intercultural que hubo en Córdoba hace 3 años, en la que se propuso la promoción de un código de buenas prácticas para los periodistas que informen sobre cuestiones sensibles como religión, otras culturas, migración, discriminación, radicalización e integración. Me gustaría finalizar haciendo una referencia a la tradición de tolerancia y respeto a la diversidad cultural de la España medieval. La Escuela de Traductores de Toledo promovió una existencia pacífica y un entendimiento mutuo entre cristianos, musulmanes y judíos mediante el intercambio de conocimientos y de tradiciones educativas. El resultado fue una cultura común, un patrimonio cultural común de tolerancia, sabiduría y pensamiento mucho más rico. Muchas gracias.
Solamente 2 palabras para presentar a las conferenciantes, Zendaya Blum y Valeria Bello, que son las 2 investigadoras de la Universidad de Naciones Unidas. Y que es un placer que estén entre nosotros porque, como decía antes, finalmente la política es una dimensión de la cultura y en el trabajo que ellas desarrollan, de alguna manera, tiene que ver con lo que trabajamos en este máster. Como colegas también y académicas que son, pues les agradecemos mucho que estén aquí. Zendaya, que es británica, es politóloga, especialista en ética y política, que es lo que ella ha escrito más, y concretamente en los estatutos de ciudadanía, en la forma de articular la condición de ciudadano para personas sin patria y, curiosamente, en la articulación de activismo social, propuestas académicas y trabajo de las administraciones. Y finalmente también en el uso de las nuevas tecnologías de Internet para aumentar las audiencias y el mejor entendimiento entre estos sectores tan opuestos. Ha escrito numerosos trabajos para las publicaciones de Naciones Unidas y esta tarde pues, hablará para nosotros de estos temas. Voy a aprovechar también para presentar a Valeria, que en su caso es italiana, está formada como doctora en Ciencias Políticas en la Universidad de Nápoles y es máster de Relaciones Internacionales en Bolonia y ha desarrollado un trabajo sobre todo en la sociología y las relaciones internacionales, concretamente en la construcción de identidades en las dinámicas de apertura y cierre de sociedades. Ellas van a pronunciar sus intervenciones en inglés y Naya tienes la palabra.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for allowing me to speak in English. I hope that, like you, for me, I can understand Spanish much better than I can speak it. So you will certainly understand me better than if I try to speak Spanish. First of all, I want to say what great honor it is to share the table and the room with such esteemed colleagues. And I'm really excited at this unexpected opportunity to share the discussion with Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the Mission for UNAOC. And thank you also for inviting us to this intercultural dialogue, indeed, between languages as well. So what I would like, it's up here, great. So what I'm going to look at here is the exciting projects and the exciting initiative of the Alliance of Civilizations, but also to try and find something to critique within it, because that's, I guess, what's going to make the discussion more interesting. And I'm going to ask through this whether multiculturalism as a state-based concept can be globalized. That's what the question's going to be by looking at the Alliance of Civilizations. Very briefly, I'm hoping to look more into the history of how the Alliance was created, coming out of the idea of a clash of civilizations from Huntington in 1993, and then the situation of terrorist attacks, as we know, in Madrid and in the US and elsewhere in Europe, and then looking at how this may have affected the way in which its initiatives can be developed now and in the future, and looking at how an understanding of problems with multiculturalism when a state-level multiculturalism is spread to a global level might help us to try and understand the best trajectories for the future. So that's what I'm hoping to look at. So to try and understand the development of the UNAOC, I found it useful to look at the development of the discourse of intercultural dialogue on a global level. And to do this, it was most useful to analyze the speeches of the Directors General of UNESCO, because UNESCO, since a very long time, has been pushing intercultural dialogue, and so when they talk about it, we know that it's being talked about. I found that by doing this, there seemed to be three key spikes in the discussion of intercultural dialogue and related terms that seem to mean something similar. And I think those three key spikes can help us to understand the UNAOC. The first one in the early 1990s comes around the time of the beginning of the discussion of a clash between civilizations. Indeed, Huntington told us the fundamental source of conflict in the New World will not be primarily ideological or primarily economic. The great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. Nation-states will remain the most powerful actors in world affairs, but the principal conflicts of global politics will occur between nations and groups of different civilizations. That was said in 93, and although there was a lot of dissent from that, there were a lot of people writing that indeed maybe there's no clash and maybe there's not even civilizations. The general throw of the discourse became one that there is going to be a clash, and how do we avoid it? And I think that has driven very much the way in which the discourse of intercultural dialogue developed. And indeed, in 1997, Khatami of Iran developed the idea of the dialogue of civilizations. And I think we can see that his idea led to a new development in the discussion of intercultural dialogue, leading to 2001. Indeed, Khatami brought together a summit of 50 heads of states of Islamic countries in Tehran in 1997 to introduce his idea of the dialogue among civilizations, which he moved between of and among, which may be a question of translation or maybe not, because I don't read Farsi. But he thought that this would be a new conception of international politics. And he brought this idea to the General Assembly of the United Nations. He brought it to UNESCO. He presented it on the American television channel CNN, and also came to international conferences. Until in 2001, one indicator of his success was, if we can see, that the United Nations General Assembly declared 2001 to be a year of dialogue among civilizations. So I think this could be the first step towards the UN AOC that was to develop later on. But as we know, 2001 is also famous in intercultural dialogue questions because it was when the 9/11 attacks happened in New York. And at this point, it became clear that maybe dialogue wasn't going to be, and a lot of people were thinking maybe dialogue isn't going to be enough. Maybe this clash is happening now, and we need to move away from what was being discussed. This worried a lot of people. And then what is interesting to see is that when the bombings happened in Madrid, someone had to do something and said, wait, stop, let's not give up all hope of dialogue. Let's create something, and we'll call it something different, and it's going to be an alliance of civilizations, no longer just the dialogue, an alliance. And this was taking a kind of rhetoric of the time. This was the time of the Iraq War, when words like alliance were taking on new meanings as well in international discourse. Maybe slide 4 can help to see Zapatero's speech to the United Nations General Assembly is very interesting in its wording. Not only because he's no longer talking about a dialogue, but an alliance, but also he's talking now to political leaders, and it's very much at this moment a political thing, whereas Khatami's was intentionally apolitical. He wanted it to be about cultural practitioners and intellectuals, but at this moment this was going to be an alliance and a political one. What's interesting also is the focus that's made from this very early stage on el mundo occidental y el mundo árabe y musulmán, which is interesting for many reasons. One, because el mundo occidental is a geographic description, and el mundo árabe y musulmán is one that is maybe a cross between ethnic and religious. So it's an interesting beginning to what's going to become a very exciting initiative, but coming out of a very particular set of circumstances that is interesting to understand. In 2005, the UNAOC was launched by Kofi Annan, who stated that the alliance will aim to address the emerging threats emanating from hostile perceptions that foment violence, and to bring about cooperation among various efforts to heal such divisions. Events of recent years have highlighted the sense of a widening gap and a lack of mutual understanding between Islamic and Western societies, an environment that has been exploited and exacerbated by extremists in all societies. The Alliance of Civilizations is intended as a coalition against such forces. So it's very interesting that at that moment it was considered necessary to use words like coalition between these groups, but something which I think the Alliance is moving away from in the way in which it acts. But it's interesting to see this history in the appellation. I think that this is just to try and understand how it was arising and to note how it was created. So in 2005-2006, a high-level group was set up to try and figure out what this alliance should be. It was a new and exciting concept, and it was necessary to bring together really top leaders from around the world to try and understand what to do. We can see here that just over half are coming from North America, Europe, and the MENA, the North Africa and Middle East region, which is relevant because of the moment in which it was arising and the conflicts it was trying to address. But it was very much a balance. Other than that, it's pretty much a balanced group of the leading people of the time. But then the emphasis towards North America Europe and the North Africa and Middle East region seems in some ways to have persisted in the UN AOC, although in other ways not. Indeed, you can see, for example, the very successful forum in Rio was none of these actors, and it was a very important one. But there are, it might be useful to have a look at the group of friends, as you mentioned. 112 states are members of the group of friends, as you mentioned, and 81 are non-members of the group of friends. So and I want to note that the membership of the group of friends is neither exclusionary nor exceptional. So I don't know why certain states are not members, but it's interesting to note that the states that don't seem to be members, and to think how this might be ways in which the UNAOC can develop in the future. It seems that the biggest group of states, non-members of the UNAOC, come from Africa. Indeed, 21% of the UNAOC's group of friends are from Africa, which is a large percentage, but Africa represents 30% of member states. But this is based, since I did an initial analysis in 2013, Libya, as well as Iraq and Singapore, have joined the group of friends, so indeed now all North African states are members, which makes it particularly striking that such a large number of sub-Saharan states are not. But maybe they have there may be many reasons why this is, and they may have other interests, and it might be something to push towards in the future to find ways that they can find a reason to commit to such an exciting initiative. It's also interesting to note the small island states that seem to not be members, both in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world. Now, I don't know why this would be, but the President Wade of Senegal in 2006 noted, he quotes, "a total silence about Black Africa and Black African civilizations." He goes on to ask who is talking with whom, and argues that to those involved that we should insist on a definition of civilization and not simply presume its meaning. I'm not sure what to take from what he's saying, but it's interesting to note that he's saying it. So I think that this might be an interesting way to try and understand what is the nature of the alliance in the alliance of civilizations, and what's the nature of the civilizations in them. But the thing about this is that there are a lot of extremely exciting projects of the Alliance of Civilizations throughout the world. So this is just one little example of something that's a little problematic, trying to find something to critique so we can have a discussion. But as you mentioned, there's many exciting projects. I chose some of the ones that I thought were particularly global in nature. I really recommend the Plural Plus project, especially for those interested in patrimony, because you have people expressing their culture in so many different ways. And really the young people, I can't believe these videos are made by young people, because they are really exceptional quality and provocative things. But I could go through all of these excellent initiatives. Instead, I recommend that you check them out. And really, I've learned a lot from them. But trying to find something to critique again, it might be useful to consider one of the projects that seems to be doing less well in this area. John Stuart Mill mentioned that to learn from others and to converse with them, it's crucial to hear what they have to say and not just what our teachers choose to say that they say. And for this, I think it's brilliant that the UNAOC is saying that we need to look to the voices of others to try and understand what is really in their minds. And for this reason, I'm glad you brought up the Global Experts Project, which I'm thinking is a fantastic start to which will hopefully become a really powerful resource. And this is just to very quickly mention some analysis that I've made of the Global Experts Project. Now, it's truly global in its representation of interesting issues, but two interesting aspects came to me at this stage of development of the project. And one would be the regions about which there is expertise, and the other would be the regions where expertise is located. So just having a quick look at what I could find, it seemed that there are 3 regions of interest, as to be expected given the focus of the alliance. Europe, with 150 experts on Europe, North Africa and the Middle East, 130 experts on them, and North America with 109 experts. And although the Balkans is very interestingly dealt with in other areas of the UNOSC, in this particular one, there's only 17 experts on the Balkans available through this particular resource. And I think because it's such an exciting resource, it would be great to find ways to elaborate it further. The other interesting thing to note is the regions where the expertise is located. Primarily in Europe, where there are 210 of the experts, and in North America, where there are 261. And maybe it's interesting to note for this audience in Casa de América, there are only 7 experts located in South America and the Caribbean. But then that's also a question of where resources are located, and it's certainly not a problem of the UNOSC, it's just something that we can work together to try and find ways maybe to accommodate. But one thing that's particularly interesting to me is that the United States didn't join the group of friends until 2010. But since joining, they've become a very important member. And indeed, the spike, perhaps, in the use of intercultural dialogue in 2009, and then particularly in 2010, may be related to that. I don't know. It's hard to analyze. But indeed, it's interesting to notice the high percentage of experts located in the United States, and that's probably because of the amazing amount of resource available, especially in terms of universities and others in the US. I think it might be a good idea, just to move quickly on, to mention the theoretical side of what I'm hoping to discuss. So multiculturalism is a very, very huge topic that I don't even begin to try to catch in this very short moment in time. But generally, there seem to be 2 main types of multiculturalism discourse, by the way, can either be some descriptive thing. Oh, fine, that's fine. A descriptive thing saying that there is multiculturalism in a society, that is, distinct cultures are interacting well, or it could be a normative thing. And then I want to take a very quick model of the normative version of multiculturalism. There's 2 types of that, mosaic and hodgepodge, I'm calling it, using the terminology in 1999, provided by Jopke and his colleagues. And this is a quotation from Amartya Sen, and I've put in Jopke's terminology, saying there are, I would argue, 2 basically distinct approaches to multiculturalism, one of which concentrates on the promotion of diversity as a value in itself, mosaic multiculturalism. The other approach focuses on the freedom of reasoning and decision-making and celebrates cultural diversity to the extent that it's as freely chosen as possible by the persons involved, hodgepodge multiculturalism, sort of this way. So what I'm wondering, I'm trying to understand, if we're using this as a model, which of these would be a good way to model the alliance? And I don't think either is. But the small and peripheral problematic elements that I have found, I'm wondering if they can be understood for me by using the language of mosaic multiculturalism, because I think the very positive aspects are hodgepodge multiculturalism, potentially on a global level. But is time running out? Time. So, okay, I can stop if. I just was wondering about time. So just to mention very quickly some of the concerns that have been voiced with mosaic multiculturalism. Yeah, go on. One is that it forces people into unique brackets, which may not reflect the messy way that society is composed. One is that it ignores minorities within minorities. 3 is that it overlays discussion of multiculturalism with an assumed privileging of a hegemonic culture of the state in which the multiculturalism is taking place. And 4, it doesn't explain how, among such groups, a coherent political culture can take place. I think what the Alliance of Civilizations might be giving us on a global level is the way to deal with a lot of these problems. But still, because I'm here to try and make a critique, I think the places where a critique might be made, they might be with regard to some of these questions. So maybe to move on, because I think time might be tight, I just want to look at 3 ways that we might think that multiculturalism might be globalized. One might be that, and in fact, multiculturalism is often globalized by the idea that we should adopt multiculturalist policies in an increasing number of states. That's the normal way. The second one is the acknowledgement that, and the use of the fact that the intercultural policies and the multicultural policies within a state affect international relations. This is clearly something addressed within the Alliance and addressed very well. And it's also something that's become increasingly clear, for example, with the problem of the Danish cartoons of Muhammad, which led to very significant international consequences for Denmark. But I want to look at the problematic element. So the problematic element, I think, is the third, which is not really discussed for the reason that I think it's probably a bad idea to try and stretch multiculturalism theory to a global scale. So this isn't very often theorized, and I think because it's not thought to be a useful thing. But I think that some of the drawbacks that I mentioned earlier in the way in which the UNOSC is functioning might be doing this, but I'm not sure. I'm putting forward some thoughts. And I think that the other two are the places in which it's achieving extremely well. So maybe I should just jump extremely briefly to mention that I think that we should maybe read this. I think that in order to try and find a place to critique within this discussion, maybe the unique categorization into civilizations should be analyzed further. Now, I think that in the actual practice of the UNOSC is different from the appellation, from the categorization into civilizations. And I think it's a useful thing to analyze, which isn't analyzed so much, the way in which the practice and the theory and the development are related. Next, the UNOSC has done extremely important work with regard to minorities within minorities, and especially groups like the Roma, who fall across states and don't fall easily into groups that could become members of the group of friends. So it's extremely useful, the work that's been done. But in the way in which it could be seen from the outside, from the naming of the UNOSC and the history, it could be that this would be a concern. The appearance of an assumed hegemony seems to be there, and I don't know whether it's there or not, but I could imagine that those who are not members of the group of friends might be imagining there might be such a hegemony. So I wonder if one of the ways to move forward would be to try and break that perception. And I think, finally, that cultural concerns are crucial, and I think everyone here acknowledges that cultural concerns are really important. But as you mentioned, sometimes the problems that arise are not because of membership of civilizational groups, but because of problems of political or economic discrepancies of power or military histories. But I think you're completely right, and indeed the General Assembly has been completely right in noting the importance of culture in the development of the post-2015 goals, and also, as you mentioned, the way in which to resolve problems. And I think that's the key and exciting thing that the UNOSC is doing, and I'm trying to find ways in which we can look to the future and how it continues to develop. I think as a part of the United Nations family, it seems to be extremely important as a group of agencies and member states who are working to try and deal with shared problems in the world, and I think that it seems to be playing an extremely important role. I think it's important. It might be good to finish with a quotation from the Doha Forum report of the UNOSC in 2011, where they accurately said, over this very short period, the 4 years since the high-level report on the UNOSC began to be implemented in 2007, the UNOSC met a number of preconditions so that now it is considered as the UN platform for a global intercultural dialogue and cooperation. So I think the question I posed at the beginning was whether multiculturalism can be globalized. I think that possibly it can't. But I think that what the UNOSC is so powerful in doing isn't multiculturalism globalized, but the places where maybe we have space to improve might be those places where it looks like that's what might be happening. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Sorry. So it's a pleasure, it's a real pleasure, it's an honor to share the table with these illustrious speakers and with Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the Alliance of Civilizations. And it's a pleasure to be here in this beautiful palace, and I would like to thank the Universidad Complutense de Madrid for inviting us for this event and for its organization in collaboration with the Casa de América, which is hosting us. So congratulations for the organization of the event. And we really enjoy this opportunity to explain our work to you. So as before was said, I'm Valeria Bello. I'm a research fellow at the United Nations University, the Institute on Globalization, Culture and Mobility. And I'm a sociologist, a political sociologist, and since I joined the United Nations University, I've been investigating the theme of intercultural dialogue, because, as it was said before, it is extremely important, particularly in this in the current time when you see that the complexity of globalizing societies put us in the condition to interact continuously with intercultural issues, have intercultural relations, and I think the whole human life is concerned because of intercultural issues from many different perspectives. If you just consider the common life of citizens in hospital, in schools, even tourists and immigrants and international meetings, we all have continuously, daily, a number of, an incredible number of intercultural relations. And together with the intercultural relations, intercultural issues arise. And these intercultural issues is what we are aiming at sort of investigating to see particularly what kind of question can arise. And the intercultural dialogue is a concept which is helping us to deal with this difficult research field. Indeed, as these problems concern different areas, there are different disciplines which are investigating intercultural dialogue. So indeed, I think it started in the early 50s with the business communication, because also in the field, for example, if you consider the activities of companies, business, men who needed to meet other businessmen from companies of other areas of the world, they started to have issues coming from different cultural background of the person who were negotiating. And they realized, they were the first to realize that indeed some negotiations failed just because of cultural issues. And it was even without the intention of provoking such difficulties, of course, without that intention, because they wanted to make business with another company. So they realized that there are ways of behaving that in certain culture are perfectly understandable, while in others are not acceptable. So the field of intercultural studies started to analyze this kind of problematics. And now we can say that from the 80s, it has been established as a known branch of research, which is really interdisciplinary, because there are many different disciplines contributing to it: social sciences, political sciences, journalism, communication, economics, business studies, legal studies. And if we consider the problems arising in schools and hospitals, also there are some health studies and education, humanities, which are concerned with the theme of intercultural dialogue. So when we started at GCM, well, we had different perspectives. We also have a colleague who is in Barcelona. Currently, she's an anthropologist. I'm a political sociologist. She works in legal studies and political science. So we had different perspectives on intercultural dialogue, but they are really overlapping sometimes, because all these themes, indeed, they are related to the way we interact within the society. And until now, the question has been that even if we use different terms to consider, for example, the coexistence of different groups in a society, like terms like acculturation, assimilation, integration, in the end, until some years ago, in the disc behind, whatever kind of disc, there was the idea that at some point the in-group, so the society which was receiving these immigrants, had to ingest this out-groups, these outsiders in the society. Then, as Tendai has brilliantly introduced, the concept of multiculturalism emerged, and it brought a different perspective on the way this could happen concretely. But what's the difference between interculturalism and multiculturalism, and why we are studying interculturalism instead of multiculturalism? Because indeed, interculturalism covers also different questions which are not the consequence of coexistence in the same territory. So they can arise even if you're not sharing the territory, so if you're not living in the same place. In international relations, particularly, this is used to have a new kind of perspective on interstate relations. And this was possible because finally in this discipline now we have approaches which look at culture, at values, at ideas, identities as resources and as means to which affect the international relations which are happening between states. But why interculturalism instead of multiculturalism? Because this concept is a broader concept which can include things which are different from the simple coexistence, as I was saying, in particular the dialogue and these interactions, like state interactions or other kind of interaction, like business companies, or simply, I don't know, people who, even tourists who want to have a service in hospital if they have a problem where they are visiting a city, a foreign city. So we have many different situations in which we need to understand how to deal with the diversity. And in interculturalism, the role of communication is particularly important because it is based on the concept of dialogue, as we will see. But the most important difference, I would say, is the fact that interculturalism and intercultural dialogue doesn't have the aim to preserving cultures as they are sort of static things that we have to deal with. But interculturalism enables the circulation of cultures, enables cultures to talk with each other, enables the exchange of cultures. They also enable cultures to move, to develop, to adapt to the context. So interculturalism looks at cultures as dynamic processes. So this is, I think, the most interesting aspect of interculturalism. But what is intercultural dialogue then? Well, indeed, after 2 years of research, I could say we still don't have a definition for intercultural dialogue. So I don't know what is intercultural dialogue. But there is a reason for this, because intercultural dialogue is a process, it's an evolving process. And indeed, we can, if we need to find a definition, I would call it the practice, a practice which is emerging within the United Nations and among this group of friends in the Alliance of Civilization. It started to, I think, to emerge as a sort of neutral expression between the two that Tendai mentioned. So the dialogue of civilization and the alliance of civilization, because as we will see in a few minutes, indeed at the beginning there were different perspectives on how to deal with intercultural issues, and not all the members of the United Nations Security Council thought that the Alliance of Civilization could be the place where to discuss this. So this is something that in the time of a decade has been discussed and has changed. In particular, it has been discussed within the Security Council, because intercultural dialogue particularly relates with questions of security. As you can see in this table, in the first half of the decade, it was mostly connected to questions of security. So when within the UN, the different entities or states or representatives of state were discussing intercultural dialogue, they were discussing questions of security, because it was linked to issues of terrorism, problems arising from prejudice, and for this reason, racism at the beginning was also a topic very much interconnected with the topic of, with the theme of the concept of intercultural dialogue. While at the beginning, religion was not so much connected to the question of intercultural dialogues. While in the second half, you can see that then the discourse started also to involve more question of religion, differences in religions. What is important of intercultural dialogue is that it provides ways to look, to managing, to deal with diversities in a way which is more neutral than multiculturalism. And in particular, it was considered in some studies that when you deal with diversity, there are some situations which can engender tensions between parties. Go back to the other slide to show you that, for example, one of the most important concern is that when there is a negotiation, things can be framed within a different cultural background, and this can be interpreted by the person differently from the way it was, from the intention of the speaker. So, for example, it was some researchers discovered that could prove that in particular translations could affect the results of negotiations, even at international level. So the real problematic was coming from the different way attitudes and behaviors were framed in a particular cultural perspective. And indeed, this is important because the way we frame a concept, the way we frame interactions, structure the way relations happen then. And in fact, for this reason, we can say that negotiation and struggles around cultures all contribute to structuring power relations. So for this reason, when in the United Nations Security Council, the member states started to talk about intercultural dialogue, they were giving different interpretations. And at some point in 2010, they realized that there should have been some sort of clarification about what intercultural dialogue is. So I've, in an analysis of a particular meeting which was key for this, I could, as you can see in this table, I could see that there were many concepts connected to the concept of intercultural dialogue. But the important thing is that this practice was sort of spreading a common understanding of the way cultural issues and identity issues should be treated. And even was creating a sort of common knowledge. For this reason, I would say we can call this process now a practice, so the practice of intercultural dialogue, because little by little these states started to have a common ground on which to discuss very delicate issues. Because as you can see in this table, connected to the problems of the question of intercultural dialogue, there were things like concepts like tolerance within societies, extremism, terrorism, prejudice. They were all considered sort of antagonism of intercultural dialogue. So the the final aim of intercultural dialogue was to bring peace and security to the international community. And as you can see, all of the representatives in the Security Council in that meeting, they agreed that intercultural dialogue should aim finally at achieving peace and security, a stable peace and security for the international community through things like tolerance among cultures, through concrete action like the Alliance of Civilizations, through by involving, for example, different parties like also civil societies, youth, women, and not only institutional actors like mediators. So the importance of this concept and the way it evolved in the decade then brought in 2010 a sort of reconciliation, or I think also on terms, on the terminology used and on the different concept. For example, as you can see, some of the representatives mentioned the Alliance of Civilization as a platform for intercultural dialogue. Most of them, I would say, 7 out of 15. But and the other half, they were mentioning the dialogue of civilization. But all of them considered that intercultural dialogue was the most important tool of preventing conflict. And indeed, some of the members, some of these states at the time were not members of the Alliance of Civilization, that after the meeting, like also the US at the time of this meeting, they were not a friend of the Alliance of Civilization, but soon after this, or some months before this meeting, they joined the Alliance of Civilization. And after this meeting also, Lebanon joined the Alliance of Civilization. So I think the way the discussion around the concept of intercultural dialogue have evolved, have developed in the Security Council, have in a certain way allowed to develop a common knowledge to deal with these issues, which are very delicate, because as you can see, part of the content of the dialogue should be on human rights, but some states, some representatives were, for example, mentioning the Israeli-Palestinian question as one of the main, of the key questions to be solved within the intercultural dialogue platform, the framework of intercultural dialogue. But who should be the parties involved in this practice, in the intercultural dialogue? Because it is true that it is important that states should participate and should join this platform of intercultural dialogue, but also other parts of the society should be involved, because the society needs to be permeated of, as before, the ambassador of the Alliance of Civilization has mentioned, and I'm happy that to hear this. It is very important that intercultural relations and intercultural values are spread through the society. So through the common citizens. So, and it's not only something which states and governments talk about. So, particularly, for example, in a different research I've carried out on prejudice and attitudes towards immigrants, which is the other research interest I have, I could see that indeed education is a very important, plays a very important role in prejudice. So we need to educate people to avoid prejudice and to decrease the level of prejudice towards immigrants. But in particular, this research showed that it's not only education per se, but it's education in a certain direction, particularly the education towards intercultural values, proved to be a very important component of the attitudes of societies towards immigrants. So as you can see, these themes are all interrelated, because then the increase of prejudice in societies is perceived by other countries, other states, as something which is exasperating people's life, and then it can exacerbate conflict, even between states. I remember a famous case, for example, in Italy, of a situation which then created tensions between the Bulgarian government and the Italian government because of a situation of prejudice some years ago. So all these themes, topics are really interrelated, and for this reason, the role of civil society in particular should increase in dealing with this. With these issues. To conclude, I would say that indeed the practice of intercultural dialogue and platforms like, so institutions like the Alliance of Civilization are important to create a common knowledge and a common ground to start discussing these delicate issues with a different behavior, and creating a feeling that there is no tension around the content of the dialogue itself. There is no tension about the final aim, because everyone is in everyone's interest to achieve a stable peace and security in the international community. But this should be done by all relevant parties, not only at the international level, but also at national level and the local level. As it was said before, it is important to spread this intercultural dialogue and to spread intercultural values. So the practice of intercultural dialogue shouldn't stop at the international level, but should be something that should be part of the common life of citizens. And for this reason, there should be more activities inspired by this practice at local and national level. And indeed, the Alliance of Civilization is contributing to this in an incredible way. And also I agree that preventive diplomacy and the role of what has been, for example, defined as smart tool of foreign policies should include intercultural dialogue as a starting point for all types of negotiations, so from interstate, international agreements, interstate negotiation, government negotiation, but also normal interaction within school, within hospital, within the business, and all the whole public sphere, I would say, should be permeated of intercultural values. So thank you very much for your attention.